Hello, everyone, and welcome to Education Leadership for a Digital World, a digital promise webinar series supported by the Wallace Foundation. I'm Barbara Pape, Policy and Communications Director for the Learner Variability Project at Digital Promise. Today's webinar is Rethinking Special Education During COVID-19. Our expert panelists today are Lindsay Jones, CEO of the National Center for Learning Disabilities, Megan Gross from Poway Unified School District, a California State Teacher of the Year, and Kim Eckert, a Louisiana State Teacher of the Year from West Baton Rouge Schools. Today we'll discuss how to rethink strategies used to teach all students in special education. And to provide a little bit of a framework, COVID-19's rampage across the country fundamentally changed the way schools do business, moving from brick and mortar to digital learning almost overnight. It also made very clear which students would be hardest hit in a digital learning environment. In particular, students in special education, students of color, and students living in poverty. Can each of you kick off this conversation by digging deeper into what the swift shift to home-based learning meant for many of our students in special education? And Kim, can you start us?
Hey there, Barbara. How are you?
Good, good, good. Good to see you.
It's good to see you. Okay. I can obviously only speak from my experience in my area, but I know that from where I was looking for students with disabilities in my area, that really swift shift, it kind of shone a lot of light on things that were already there. Number one, I mean, and just pervasively, obviously our students were not able to have services in a lot of cases and in any way that they needed them. There was also a huge disconnect from obviously like socialization. There wasn't a whole lot being done in terms of continued learning or even anything that would sort of remediate or help students to stay connected. Mm-hmm. And I think the biggest thing is that the training for teachers wasn't really in place, especially special education teachers, to be able to help make sure that those services were still being delivered in any way that was meaningful.
Mm-hmm. Whoa, who is next on this? I think that is Lindsay. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much for featuring this and having me here today to join this amazing panel of people I'm in awe of and I'm always excited to speak with. And I agree with everything Kim just said. I think also, you know, two of the other things that I would just point out from this is it was unfortunate that at the beginning we saw districts wait to see, I think in some cases, what the Department of Education would do, what would Congress do, and that slowed them down a little bit from kind of just hitting the ground running and starting to provide services to kids with disabilities. Most kids with disabilities have almost their whole day spent in general education with a general education teacher. That's just the way that our system has shifted. So the only thing I'd add to what Kim said is, I think also you all of a sudden had general education teachers in separate locations from special education teachers that they were used to collaborating with, trying to figure out in real time how to make things like that happen. So her point about professional development, making sure all of their educators have time to work together, know how to use the technology, then can teach the students how to use that technology, students who maybe weren't using it before. That type of planning and what it means in a virtual environment was really hard, I think, for lots of districts. And it's something we have to make sure that we focus on as we go into this next school year.
I think that's a really great point, Lindsay, and that's something that has been really interesting to watch as schools and districts make their return to learning plans for the fall or reopening plans, whatever you want to call them. Some districts are being really creative and providing like daily time for staff to collaborate. And in some places you're seeing kind of business as usual, like once a week, you know, professional learning time. Which is very like standard for traditional school. And so I think any sort of flexibility that administrators and district leaders can help provide their teachers, this collaboration is really critical. because what a lot of the students that I was supporting experienced was really their families were overwhelmed. Because especially if you're at a secondary setting, all of a sudden you're getting emails and pings and messages from 6, 7, 8 different teachers. And so where I saw a lot of success were teachers who really identified a point person and had a case manager or an advocate or a counselor be the point person for families and really help organize the online learning. You saw a lot of success, I think, in classrooms where teachers have already implemented universal design for learning, because those students were really familiar with a lot of different technology tools, and they also had choice, and they already knew what to do with choice. And I think the teachers who were really patient with their students, I have children of my own learning in the home, and especially for our students with disabilities, context is really important, right? And so if you've never been doing school at home before, it's going to take you a while to realize that we're going to be doing school at home. My son told me, home is not for learning. So, we had to work through that. And we're still having a conversation about that, about a few hours a day, home needs to be about learning. So, I think that these are really challenging opportunities, but also have seen so many incredible teachers and instructional assistants and paraeducators and therapists step up and try something completely out of their comfort zone and kind of model that fail forward growth mindset that we've been asking students to implement for a long time.
Yeah, the step up was so important and happened especially because how quickly it happened. And I know I've talked to each of you individually too. Also, some districts, schools are working with parents to help provide professional learning experiences for them in terms of learning at home. As you said, Megan, your son isn't used to learning at home, and so it's how do you work the parents, and we'll talk about student voice, particularly Kim will a little bit later. So we also wanted to chat today about the intersectionality of race and special education. Our students of color and in special education faced hurdles before COVID, and in many ways, COVID made these challenges even more stark. So can you address how their challenges, how these students' challenges have been exacerbated, and what are some solutions that work to include and nurture all students in their learning experiences so everyone can meet their potential? Megan, can you kick us off with this one?
Sure. I really think this is a moment of reckoning as a white middle-class teacher, right? Of someone who I think I unconsciously separated what it meant to have a disability and what it meant to be a student of color. And that was an enormous error on my part as an educator, right? That intersectionality and that identity piece for students is so critical. And so I think there's this moment here that we have to take advantage of as those of us in the special education field and really think critically about our instruction. I think what was exacerbated in the spring for many students was that their instruction was not relevant. And it wasn't related to what was happening in their home. It wasn't related to what was happening in our communities or in the world around us. Very few times did some of my own children's teachers even mention COVID. And so when you're learning in a crisis, I think we have to acknowledge we're in a crisis, and we have to acknowledge and give space for students to express that in different ways, and to really pause and kind of let them lead the instruction. And so I think one of the things that I've been thinking about of how do we move forward in this is really being critical with our family engagement. Finding out, is this a family that wants 1,000 text messages, emails, or do I need to pick up the phone? This really archaic technology that doesn't even work like this anymore, but having just a phone call. I cold called families last spring that I had never met before, and we ended up having 30-minute conversations and supported each other. as working moms, and how are we going to do this? And so I really think what support do you need needs to be asked more, right? And also, is our learning relevant to our home? And so there's I think Twitter is one of my favorite professional learning networks. And there is a professor from Brandeis, Dr. Amber Spry, and she put out an identity assignment. Instead of the back to school icebreaker, it's how does your family cook rice? And thinking about how does your family do it? How does your family's culture? And one of my colleagues actually used that prompt for her extended school year special education summer school class. And she had students with varying disabilities and varying ability to communicate. And she said, oh my gosh, it was the best assignment ever. There were pictures, there were videos, and everybody did it differently. And so what a great way to engage kids that isn't this kind of standard beach ball toss. So I think that we have really powerful opportunities to make incredible shifts for our students of color and our students with disabilities this fall.
Thanks, Megan. Kim? Yeah.
All right, I could listen to Megan talk forever and ever. So obviously, everything that she just said, it gives me just so much hope. And to your original question and how things that were already there were exacerbated, I know in my own community and in my own experience, again, there was a massive digital divide, and that was huge. And I think not only whenever we talk in terms of bandwidth, right? I think of the fact that like my students, my learners with disabilities, how often were they given a chance to take a typing class or to be in a class that wasn't an intervention or to be in a class where they had any hope of learning how to use internet tools if that wasn't already something that a classroom teacher was doing. And so whenever you look at something like COVID that relied on us all stepping up and all being able to know these things, that was something that really played heavily into my heart. I also think about now, and I'm really proud of some things that my district and that we were able to do over the year, not knowing that global pandemic would happen, but we've really taken a really active stance in supporting our paraeducators. So I remember at the beginning of last year, we started to realize that our SPED paras are incredible human beings and they really want to do a good job, but oftentimes school districts don't do a very good job of training them or helping them understand why modifications or why different scaffolds are important or why different learning technologies are important. So we spent a long time like kind of planning a scope and sequence for paras, look at this idea, all hands on deck. And so I think that some of our paras were actually a lot quicker to the punch whenever COVID shut our physical schools down, because our paras were already trained in Zoom. They already understood how certain disabilities could manifest in such completely different ways. They were really kind of bought into the need and the necessity of their talents and their special skill sets. And I think that that was an amazing thing and has really great implications for moving forward with or without global pandemic. But I think that what's really exciting about now, just like Megan said, is that it is a day of reckoning to be able to own things, to be able to bring conversations that make us feel uncomfortable to the forefront, to kind of look at just disproportionate representation of certain exceptionalities, and are we providing the right supports for those? And then just like Megan said, a good old-fashioned phone call, like how many of us let like language barriers interfere with our ability to call home, with our ability to make lasting connections and relationships. And I think that because we are reliant on those, we can't just rely on kids being at school every single day. We can't take anything for granted. So every space that we have to be able to connect with learners and connect with their families and really try to understand what it takes to help them thrive and advocate for themselves, these things are all critical. They've been absent since the beginning of school, right? But they don't have to be. And I think that now that the implications are far-reaching, and that it's not just a matter of your kid, it's like our kids, my kid. I think it helps us all to realize that that these issues, they're faced by children in every school in every state, but we don't have to be held back or bound by poor decisions or lack of action that maybe we've been crippled by in the past.
Lindsay?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. With both of you. And you know, this issue has systemically throughout our nation been a major concern for years, as both of these amazing educators just alluded to. But, you know, a statistic from before COVID bears repeating, which is before COVID, 1 in 4 Black boys with an IEP received a suspension or expulsion, compared to 1 in 10 white boys with IEPs. We had huge disparities before COVID that we needed to address. Kim mentioned also the identification of students who has a disability, what type of disability they have. We've really got to make sure that we continue to focus on what the data tells us is happening there, and look deeply at our decision-making processes in schools that every day are causing these very large disparities in our system. And I think this moment is a wonderful one in our nation to have those uncomfortable conversations. And we've got the data that tells us special education is ground zero, for lack of a better way to say it, in our school system for where some of these things are really playing out. I would also say that we see in COVID as well, right? Families of color are being disproportionately impacted by this. Individuals living in poverty, absolutely impacted by COVID. And so our schools, I think, have to grab this moment right now. Take the chance to say, our children are going to be coming back. Their social emotional learning has to be among our first on the list. The trauma they're experiencing at home, we don't have a good view into. We know that teachers and educators in the building are oftentimes the first to be able to point out child abuse. Unfortunately, among students with disabilities, child abuse is higher as a rate than it is for other populations. And we've seen those reports of child abuse drop during this period. And that's because educators aren't able to see what's happening. So I just, not to be too negative about this, but just to say our students really benefit from educators, and they benefit from being in schools, nutrition, social emotional learning, all of those things. And I think understanding our decision making, how it impacts with race and poverty, something we've always had to look at, but even now is so much more exacerbated by the current health crisis that we're in, and the impacts and those disproportionate impacts, that it's important for schools and educators to be thinking through how they'll attend to those needs as they reopen.
You know, one of the silver linings of COVID, if you can even go there, is people even more recognizing the importance of building relationships. If it's building relationships with Black kids, kids who speak another language, kids who have special needs, and their families. I mean, it really has risen as something that is essential. It was essential before, but it's just being underscored right now, and that's something that each of you brought up. And also, I want to give a shout out to paraprofessionals. I have a kid who has dyslexia, and they are the best. He's in his 20s now, but absolutely an excellent group of people. So teletherapy, can it work? And what do teachers need to make it effective for students? Oh, and well, that was Lindsay, if you can start.
I'll jump in on that one.
Yeah, just jump in.
I think, you know, I mean, first of all educators are working so hard right now to redo every lesson plan, work even harder to reach out to their colleagues to collaborate, all of the outreach to families. There is so much going on, I think, to establish those relationships, Barbara, that you're talking about, that is probably a silver lining to this. But I also think teletherapy so one of the big issues we've had systemically in special education is having enough specialized therapists, related service personnel, specialized instructional support personnel, especially in rural areas, oftentimes also in urban areas. Some of the professional associations representing some of those folks have done a great job putting in place systems to help them provide teletherapy. Right now, we've got some terrific examples of those working. That's something we think all districts should be leaning into. And when it comes to any state regulations or state laws that might be in the way of allowing those practices, now is the time to remove those from the books. Because for certain types of therapy and service, we've got educated professionals doing a terrific job delivering it over Zoom, able to watch, working with families. Some cases, we have some great school psychologists actually who've written pieces for the Educating All Learners Alliance and educatingalllearners.org site, talking about how they would never have used Zoom in certain services, and they're actually finding that the student responds better in that, which seems insane. It's not every student. I'm sure that many students don't, but there are many that actually are. And I think that's the testament to the educators who are really working and experimenting and trying, kind of as Megan was saying, pushing the boundaries and failing forward in some ways. And teletherapy is definitely a bright spot of this particular time, and something that we do hope continues going into the future.
Kim?
Hey. I'm a teacher, obviously, so I'm a very realistic idealist. So to your original question, can it work? Anything can work if we do it well, right? And if we train people, we give people the tools. Because I also think that people would be doing the thing if they knew how to do the thing. So I think that it's really important to go back to the idea of making sure that people feel confident and they feel trained in whatever tool that they're given to implement, because our anxiety goes down whenever our confidence goes up, and there's only one way to really have that happen. And I remember, so I taught exclusively special education for more than half of my career. And I remember going to workshops for inclusion or inclusive practice, and 95% of the participants were special educators. So we were always missing this critical other piece. And I think that that's another space that's really exciting, because whenever I became a general educator, knowing what the other side kind of was like, that kind of isolation of really trying your hardest as an inclusion teacher, I knew how to put those pieces into place. And I knew how to really leverage all of this incredible expertise and skill in supporting students in my inclusion class. And I think that if we put that into what we're doing now, and we're not looking to really retrofit practices, and we're looking ahead of how can we be proactive, that it really becomes a matter of knowing that these practices can work. Teletherapy can absolutely work, but how can we include that into the planning, and how can we include all of the stakeholders and all of the service providers in a way that really complement and reinforce. And the thing is, a statement like that, we could have easily have made it last year, but I hope we're not making it again next year, because now we have like really all hands on deck and everybody's willing to learn and willing to try. And I think now's our moment to really make sure that these amazing practices that Lindsay mentioned, how do we get those success stories, and how do we get that confidence into the hands of people who need it the most, so that they're not afraid to try, and they're not afraid to fail forward, like Megan said.
I love that, right? I think we all do what we know, right? Like the Maya Angelou quote of like, I did then what I knew how to do. Now that I know better, I do better, right? Like that has been like my mantra for my special education career, right? Like I look back on the kids I had my first year of teaching and I thought, oh, I could do this so much better now. And we have to carry that through this year. And I think teachers also need, and therapists and related service providers, right, an understanding of what are best practices in digital learning. Because all of our pedagogy is based on, can I see you? Can I talk to you? Can I be right next to you if you're not paying attention? And if I have to do this virtually, that pedagogy changes. And I think we've been in such a state of crisis, right, that we've just been trying to survive. And I think now is really that moment to kind of dig into some of the research that exists on distance learning. And a lot of it's on adult learners. But what do we know about best practices? You know, and a lot of it, what I love is like, it's aligned to, like, if you look at multimedia learning theories, like they're aligned to what special education teachers are taught. Like you segment, you chunk it, you get rid of all the extra stuff that isn't related to the content you're learning. I really feel like this is something that we need to make sure that we're providing professional development on, because it's not enough to just have the next best learning management system or, you know, really great, cute, interactive Bitmoji classrooms. We have to have instructional practices that match the environment we're in. And I think that's a really big hurdle because we've never done this on such a large scale before ever. But I think if we can start pulling some of those resources that we know from multimedia learning, we could do something just incredibly innovative and really relevant and meaningful to children and teachers right now. We can't just put our regular brick and mortar school online.
Sorry, I have to interject with a quick amen, thank you. That's all.
All right, we like that interjection. You know, listening to you guys right now, I don't know why this came into my mind, but it's like you had a Lego set, right? And you threw it up into the air and all the pieces scattered and you have this great opportunity to rebuild. And that is another, if I can say, silver lining to this pandemic, is that what I hear from a lot of teachers, you guys in particular, but others as well, is like, wow, this is an opportunity to do things differently and better to support students, all students, you know, understanding their variability. So this is our last little question here, but we're going to go take Q&A, and there's some great Q&As in there already. Learning online can be text heavy, and those of us who have worked with or have people in our family with dyslexia, we know what that means. So how can we provide content that is accessible to all students, and what do teachers need to make this happen? Because we need to support our teachers and our paraprofessionals to make this happen in an online or even in a brick and mortar environment. And Lindsay, do you want to start with this one?
Sure. I think this is where exactly Megan's point about we can't take a brick and mortar school and just make it virtual. We can't just do that. And I think in some of the rush initially, for teachers to adapt their lessons to this new environment. And also they were facing so many and still face so many barriers in terms of the digital divide that Kim discussed, just a whole bunch of different issues in trying to logistically teach online. One of the things we saw from surveys of young adults that interact with us was that they were putting up lots of PDFs, lots of inaccessible text-heavy content that really, for dyslexic learners, for students with processing issues, for students with any type of reading disability, can incredibly slow down their ability to get as much from the content and just and make them lead into these, you know, very challenging circumstances for them trying to show what they know or learn. And so I think one of the things we just have to be conscious of is, and I can't remember if it was Kim or Megan, but one of them mentioned universal design for learning, and making sure that all of our educators are really thinking through those students in the class who may have trouble accessing text, which is likely, based on what we know about the overall population of students with disabilities, to be quite a few students. It also is very likely, when we know that we have very big problems with literacy in some of our other, due to many ways of teaching reading, other types of things, but there's lots of students, not just students with disabilities, that struggle with reading. And so for educators, it's important to be focused on not just sort of putting up the brick and mortar school, but thinking about what are some unique ways that maybe other students could help with this. I could present the content in different ways so that it's accessible to the broadest range of individuals, and they can really get the right content and learn as they continue to move forward.
One of the favorite...
Megan's developed these amazing... oops, that's okay. Just want to introduce your work. And you can put it up. Megan's done these wonderful workspaces. I'm afraid my internet's a little in and out. Yeah, it is unstable. Sorry about that. But she said, let's just let me know, I'm going to try to move closer to the router. Go ahead, Megan.
So I was really excited this summer to get a chance to work with Barbara and Maida at the Learner Variability Project. And I had a chance to use the Learner Variability Navigator to start pulling strategies for how do we support students So I have a dyslexia workspace, a workspace for students with ADHD and executive functioning needs, and a workspace for students with autism. But one of the really powerful tools that I think about the Learner Variability Navigator is that it gives us this chance to look at kids as whole children, right? And it's not just this singular label of autism or dyslexia, because we know that a student with dyslexia needs more than a systematic approach to reading, right? A lot of our students with dyslexia are facing stereotype threat. They've been so unsuccessful for so long. Teachers unconsciously make judgments about that label. And so there's really great research-based factors in the Learner Variability Navigator. It's a mouthful. So emotions, social support, stereotype threat, and in the workspaces, you'll find these strategies that support that. So how do we support growth mindset? Family engagement, which we've been talking a lot about this morning, right? Fits right in there with social supports and stereotype threat, encouraging student self-advocacy. And then one of the ones I wanted to highlight, because I think it's so important right now in our virtual world, is this idea that predictability of environment and structure, and that just like we would in our brick and mortar classrooms have a daily schedule and visual schedules, checklists, rubrics. We need that in our virtual spaces as well. And I spent a lot of time with my own children and supporting other students. And it was, where is the information? And I remember a phone call with a mom where she said, I had just figured out the teacher's Google Classroom. And then this week it looks different and I don't know where anything is. And so as much as like teachers love to shift the classroom and change it all up, there's a lot to be said for predictability and the power in that for students to learn, right? Because it's one less thing to impact my cognitive load, my working memory. If I know exactly where the help button is, if I know exactly where our Zoom or Google Meet link is, then I can focus on what your actual instruction is. And thinking about text heavy, I wanted to share one of my favorite apps that I discovered this spring was Loom, L-O-O-M, which is a screen recorder. So it was really great. I would take the general education lessons, right, from our textbook or readings that the teacher had put up, and record videos for students where I read aloud the text, but also paused and said, what do you think about this picture? My own children thought I was nuts because I was talking to myself and pointing and circling things, but just being able to provide those comprehension checks like we would in the classroom. We had a lot of paraprofessionals support us in doing that, so that's a great thing to have instructional assistant support in designing more accessible texts for our students.
I've got to experience one of your lessons, Megan. That sounds really great. I think that, well, whenever schools first shut down, I think a lot of like schools and a lot of teachers were sort of in that panic mode of like, oh, let's get all the packets we've ever owned together and let's get our packets out, because it was very much survival. Like, how do we keep doing our thing? Because everybody was trying so hard to do a thing, to do something. And inevitably, those that were digital, it became very text heavy in Google Classroom, or very text heavy with whatever platform people were using, because it was basically at that point a giant computer packet, right, of just stuff, of just material. And I think that whenever we go back and to the very best teaching, right, in a 50-minute class period, I would never in a million years give somebody 40 minutes worth of things to read. And so I think that whenever we realize, so if you're asynchronous, you can absolutely put those stops in that. If you're doing a recording, why can't you say, all right, so here's the deal, guys. I want you to think about this question and press stop in just a second. And I want you to read it and reread it if you need to. Okay, go ahead, press stop, then come back, right? You could do that. You could put those natural breaks in there. If you're teaching synchronously, in Louisiana, we actually went back to school last week and now I'm virtual. And it seems sort of strange to some, but embedding time right there. We don't have to talk the entire Zoom, right? I would never do that in class. So actually giving students time, like I gave students 15 minutes to read something that I needed them to read. That's what we do in class. And I think the most promising practice is making sure that like you've got students who are agents of their own learning, like from the beginning, no matter how young. And that's something that's a really critical practice of my own class, a truly inclusive environment for every single learner in that space. So I had a lot of success whenever school first closed in March. A lot of my students within the class understood that in a lot of the other classes that they were in, that they were super bogged down with readings, and they were really concerned for their peers who had some difficulties with content being read. So my students took it upon themselves to offer these read alouds, and they were recorded. They would post it in Google Classroom. They started asking other teachers, hey, is there anything you need me to read? Is there any like assessment, or is there anything that you're giving? Could we help with that? Because my students wanted to feel empowered, and they wanted to feel like they were helping their peers that they cared about. And that type of advocacy and that type of agency that the students within my space showed, it spread. And so other teachers started reading their content aloud. And I think that sometimes things don't occur to us until maybe they're shown. So I think all those spaces, remember what natural interaction and natural collaboration and organic teaching looks like. Start from, and again, that universal design, but it doesn't just have to be with content. Ultimately, what do we want our students to do? What kind of tools can we use to get there? And you can embed those. You just have to think about them a little bit on the front end and be very intentional in making sure that accessibility and inclusivity is something that you lead within your content with at the front end.
I think I'm back in. And if all else fails, my wonderful colleague, Anthony Baker, is going to just jump in and take over. But I want to mention before we go into Q&A, we have some great questions here, that we have a resource page that includes all of Megan's workspaces, which not only dyslexia, but in autism and ADHD. We have wonderful reports and surveys with loads of information from NCLD. It's Lindsay's group. And Kim has this great video on the importance of student voice. It's wonderful. And that's in there as well as our Learner Variability Project. So here's the first question. I'll read it just direct. I'm a special ed teacher at a school where 75% are low socioeconomic and 66% are non-white. How can I encourage my families to engage in virtual learning? Most of them did not participate in virtual learning when schools closed in March. So what have you been doing to reach out to parents? Just jump in.
Okay. I would love this. I love this question because I love the families of my students. Like, it just expands my fun in a school year. Family engagement is critical. And it goes back to what I said earlier. I always assume like the most positive intent, and it has never failed me. I truly believe people would be doing the things if they knew how. And whenever you go with that assumption, it kind of shares the responsibility of that connection, right? So I think that it becomes reaching out to the families and asking, or just saying, hey, you know what, this is crazy. And like, I've got a 5-year-old and I don't even know how to break down the letter B. It's B, dude, write the letter B. I need help. And so it was no problem for me to reach out to my child's teacher and be like, hey, could you jump on and like walk me through this thing with Starfall? I don't know what you need me to do here. But I get so much grace as an educator that my daughter's teachers naturally assume positive intent with me, even though I'm useless as an early childhood educator to the other parents. The thing is, if our jobs were that easy, anybody could do them. And we know that's not the case. We are highly skilled and highly trained in our profession. You could give me every manual in the world and tell me to perform an appendectomy, but you don't want me to practice on you for the first time, right? So I think sometimes we diminish or we underestimate the fact that we are part of a profession that takes years of skill and training. So naturally, parents would need a lot of help engaging in that, especially if they may have felt disenfranchised from school whenever they were students. So everything we can do to assume that if parents had the tools, if they had the confidence, and if they had the ability, they'd be doing that. And if not, taking a step back and asking, what could we as a school do to ensure that those parents can connect, that they do feel welcome, that they do feel it's safe to ask, and that we assume that if we give them those tools, they would then be able to apply them.
Lindsay or Megan?
Yes to everything Kim said, right? If we, like, that actually really hit home for me, right? Because I'm a teacher mom, and I literally reached out to one of my son's specialists and said, no, we're not doing it. Like, I can't handle it. We're not doing it. He's gonna be fine. Right? I don't always think we gave that grace to other parents who said no. And so I think that grace and that understanding of where kids are, I had colleagues who did just that and reached out and said, how do we support you? And the family said, we can't manage all these computers. Can we just have some paper? Right? And so, like, that's what the teacher did. Every Monday she dropped off on the front porch, socially distanced, didn't interact, a packet, right, of different activities. And she's like the sweetest teacher in the world. She would often stop by Target and like get like little Lego kits or something like that for kids to do for fun. And so I think, you know, kind of ensuring, like, getting to the root of what is the issue, right? They might have technology, right? But it might be a situation where you have internet, but it's not enough to run 6 Zoom calls at the same time, because Lord help us, like, we can't all be on Zoom at the same time. So I think that just those connections with families and getting to the heart of what they need, it's what we always should have done as teachers, right? But now that we're in our students' homes and interacting much more with our families, I think it's absolutely essential.
And I'll just add a quick advocacy plug here, which is when I see statistics like that and I hear these, I completely agree with everything they said. Reach out, figure out what it is. It's very likely digital divide is a huge issue there. There's other issues with those parents working with food insecurity, with healthcare insecurity. This is a great time for our nation's teachers to be speaking out, all of their educators, saying these are reasons that we do provide federal funding for lots of these types of programs, and it's important that those remain funded and get more funding in this time of need. So I just wanted to put a plug for that systemic. We have an ability as a nation to help in some of these areas, and we should be doing this.
It's a good plug. All right, Jane has a question. How might we counter the 25-year-old high-stakes testing frenzy during this time? And how might, look at Kim, and how might we rethink assessment using COVID as a moment of opportunity? Once again, throwing those Legos up and building something new. Kim, do you want to take this question?
Oh my word, I would love to. Okay, like any good teacher, I'm actually just gonna plug a story in there, I guess. Yeah, the testing frenzy. Here's what I do know, that whenever school shut down in March, like, I feel like we should have like wind and smoke every time somebody says that. But the thing is, my students flourished and they came alive, and it had nothing to do with whether or not they could do a multiple choice standardized assessment. Every single thing that we had taught all year, they put together in their own way. I had children, like teenagers, right, leading Twitter chats about like teens coping with COVID. I had them reaching out to advocacy groups saying, you know, my voice wasn't really represented. I think you need to invite a student panelist to talk about the impact of graduation on seniors. I had students like adapting news content. They didn't feel like their peers had a fair shot at even deciphering what was real for them and what was not and what was true. So they ended up like having their own like filtered news system, and they pushed that through and Snapchat to their peers. What? And whenever I think about who I would hire, I would absolutely hire any of these students who were able to problem solve and actually develop their own problem. Like, this is a problem, we're gonna solve it, this is how. They did everything I asked them to do. And this has always been a passion of mine, because there's not a single test that would ever test this. There's nothing I could design, right? Because that's what it looks like whenever students are allowed to take what they learn and actually apply it to the world around them, not a world in the past, not a world we wish we lived in, but the actual world. And for me, that's the mark of how I knew my instruction was effective this year. And I'm a teacher who has had great growth on those types of tests. And I'm the first one to say that that's not how I want to be measured. And it's certainly not what I want on my grave whenever I'm like not in the world anymore. So yes, throwing the Legos up, absolutely. But I think we're all becoming a little bit more vocal and passionate about what happens whenever we're not tied to systems that, if they're so easily cast aside, why did we need them to begin with?
Megan or Lindsay, do you want to jump in, or should we move on?
I would just love, we need more voices, right? There are a lot of incredible organizations that have been advocating for this for a long time, that we need to get rid of these systems, right? And it's all tied to accountability, and it's tied to funding. And think about the millions of dollars that we could put into intervention and support and enrichment that instead are put on these standardized assessments. And the amount, like that, I want to go back to this idea that we wasted time in the spring. Any teacher knows that that time would have been spent standardized testing. So I think we gained like 8 weeks of a school year last year because we weren't sitting in these like hot classrooms trying to go through the problems. So, I mean, I just think we have to advocate for different realities.
I'll just give a small counterpoint to this, which is, I think, I would never want to defend standardized testing. We're very focused on the inequities that are built into that system. I will say, one of the things that we have seen and that we did see that was a positive result from standardized testing is not something that standardized testing should have caused or accountability should have caused, but so many teachers said to me, the principal never came in my room. Nobody ever cared how my kids did. My kids with disabilities, we never knew how they compared to their general education peers. And so for kids with disabilities, it did provide some really interesting information about where they were, and it definitely brought resources and powerful conversations about what they need to the forefront. That said, 25 years later, it's time for a new system. We know so much more about what kids need and what they can do. That doesn't mean we don't need to have a good benchmark and some way of understanding where all kids are. I wonder, how will my own son, how are they going to know what he knows when he goes back, right? They're going to have to use some types of formative assessments. And I want to know, where is he compared to others? I'm just curious about that because he has attention issues. And it has been a history of assuming that kids with disabilities won't ever get where their same age peers are. And so I do think the system, we still do need to push within the system. These are two amazing educators. They push every day. We want to see that throughout our nation and in ways that we can put structure and get good information about how kids are learning and what they know. And that the principal doesn't just stick all the kids with special education needs in the back, in the hallway, a place where no one ever sees them or goes. That would be a horrible result from that. So just had to throw that out there.
I'm going to ask one or two more questions, but I want other people to know that some of these we'll put in an email that comes out later, like Farah, I apologize if I mispronounced. You talked about SEL and that's more inclusive, and you mentioned the Abolition Teaching Network, which is excellent. I have a couple other ideas, but I'm going to shoot that out as a resource in an email. And so here's a question right now: how to best facilitate having those uncomfortable conversations with staff before we do so with students. For example, there was a big philosophical divide between Black Lives Matter supporters and staff who had spouses, family, etc. in NYPD. This is controversial, but it is one of those, tough conversations. So how have you, this is, and Lindsay, feel free to jump in, but for Kim and Megan as teachers in the classroom today, how do you facilitate those conversations?
So I'll try and start first. I think we have to start with ourselves as educators, right? And recognize that people are on a varying level of spectrum of their knowledge. And so I think, having staff engage in the same content, that could be watching the documentary series America to Me, right? And having conversations about what's happening in those classrooms. It could be reading the same book and then making action items, right? So it's not just a bunch of white teachers in a book club, which is kind of what we did all summer, right? But taking action, and how are we really thinking critically about our classroom and our instruction? I think trying to find ways to bridge the differences that we ask our kids to bridge every day. There are a lot of teachers who would much rather have that conversation with their students than their colleagues, right? Because we don't spend a lot of time building that relationship with our colleagues. We see them at staff meetings, maybe we see them in the lunchroom. Right now we don't see each other at all, except on a Zoom call. And so I think we don't even have those relational skills with each other sometimes to be in a place where I can trust you with this really vulnerable conversation. So I think I would start there with those relationships.
Well, I could say this, being that I am a Black teacher in the very deep South, these conversations are not new to me. And in fact, much of the reason why I became a teacher was to be able to help kind of foster conversations that help people become a little bit braver and maybe fear less than they love. And for me, a lot of times that's come, just like what Megan said, these are internal conversations, and building trust is an absolute must. And I love that she said that. Like, one does not simply bust up at the faculty meeting and attempt to school people about matters of the heart. And every fact in the world doesn't change hearts. I think that whenever you build an environment that is truly inclusive, not just diverse, but actually makes space for people's stories, we get a lot further, because it's a lot harder to tell somebody that their story is not real and that their story is not true than it is to disagree with everything else. And I think whenever we set a climate where stories are welcome, and we are actively and very consciously building trust, and we're very actively and consciously owning that to be human is to carry bias. But we can be better humans whenever we don't let that bias negatively impact our students and each other, that we're going to be a lot stronger and a lot better for it. So there's so many different approaches for this. And I know that that's not an easy answer, but it's not an easy problem. I think the only negative thing would be to do nothing at all. But certainly starting from within, building relationships, and understanding that there's no quick fix to it. There's no direct path. We have to be more conscientious and intentional about letting conversations and stories in, to make sure people understand that they are not apart from who we are. They are who we are.
I really appreciate it. I want to add to our resource list, a webinar that Megan was on. And we talked, this was with Kalisa Wing, who's on our board at the Learner Variability Project, and another national or state teacher of the year for the Department of Defense schools. And they talk a lot about, and part of our learner variability framework, which is a whole child framework, includes stereotype threat. And we talk a lot about implicit bias as well as explicit bias. And that's, what I've learned is that and both of you have said this, is that you need to look at yourself before you have these courageous conversations. I mean, it's so important to, be reflective and think about what your biases might be that you don't even recognize. But boy, we have a lot of hard work in front of us, both in terms of dealing with stereotype threat with kids who are of color, and also, kids who are special ed and kids who are both. So I can't thank you all enough, but before I thank you all enough, I want to thank the audience here, because you guys have been so interactive. Your questions are amazing and insightful, and we'll try to include in the email some answers to some of the questions or resources that can help answer some of your questions. Anthony, Tabitha, and Corinne, I'm assuming we can keep these questions in here in the email that does go out. Can't thank you all enough. I really want to thank Lindsay, Megan, and Kim for sharing their expertise and experience. I always love being with all three of you, great people. And we hope the rest of you will join us again, and you guys too. And you can find the list of upcoming webinars on our website at digitalpromise.org/webinars. As you exit, please take a moment to complete our survey, which will help guide us for future webinars. Thank you all so very much. We will talk to you all soon.